Imagine this for a second. A federal agency's new mission statement is so completely at odds with its staff that 70% of them just quit.
70%. It's an unbelievable number.
We're talking about the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Over 200 federal attorneys, the vast majority of the people working there, just resigned. And not because of budget cuts, not because they were fired.
No, it was because of a single memo, one directive from new leadership.
A directive that told them to enforce the law neutrally for everyone. So if the very experts sworn to uphold our rights refuse to work when they're told to protect all citizens equally, what does that tell you? What was really going on inside our justice system?
It raises some fundamental questions about the administrative state itself.
We are going to uncover the full story of this massive shift, the radical strategy behind it, and what it all means. Stay with us as we break this down in our in-depth discussion right here on News Focus Podcast. And if you find our reporting valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to support our channel. We truly appreciate it.
The number itself, Alex, over 200 specialized attorneys just walking out the door, that points to a conflict that goes way beyond politics.
It's not just a disagreement.
No, it's a complete ideological rupture, a break in the entire philosophy of what that division was supposed to be doing.
Okay, so let's set the scene here, because this is all part of this bigger political fight against what people call the administrative state.
Right, this huge bureaucracy of unelected federal workers who are, for all intents and purposes, making policy.
And the DOJ's Civil Rights Division was seen by critics as like the beating heart of that structure, deeply entrenched, acting on its own.
That was exactly the criticism. Before all this happened, opponents were constantly describing the division as being inundated with rabid left-wing ideologues.
Strong words.
Very. The perception was that its focus had become really narrow, moving away from protecting everyone's rights to pushing these very specific politically charged causes that favored certain groups.
And there was a concrete example of this, right, from the previous administration.
Yes, and it was a major point of contention. The division was using its federal power to influence local policies.
Specifically around gender identity.
Exactly. The big one that always came up was the threat of suing school districts if they didn't allow trans athletes to compete in female sports. That became a sort of touchstone example for critics.
So that showed the division's ideological direction at the time.
It did. It showed, in their view, that the division wasn't just neutrally enforcing the Constitution. It was actively advancing a very specific, very progressive social agenda, and they argued this created what they called a two-tier justice system.
Okay, so that's the environment. And into that firestorm walks Harmeet Dillon, the new Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights.
And her arrival was not subtle. The sources frame it as bringing in someone who was there to do a complete teardown, not just a redecoration.
Not a flamethrower.
Something like that. And you can see from the staff's reaction just how big of a change it was. Her actions were immediate, and their response was, well, explosive.
How immediate?
Her second week on the job, the catalyst was a single memo. Simple, direct, unambiguous.
And it just rewrote the entire mission statement of the division.
And the fallout was instantaneous. I mean, sources say over 100 attorneys resigned almost on the spot.
100. Just like that.
Just like that. It was a mass rejection of the new mandate that I don't think anyone in Washington saw coming.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
But that was just the beginning, wasn't it?
That was just the initial shockwave. You have to understand the scale here. The entire division, staff and all, is just over 300 people.
So 100 people walking out. That's a third of their legal experts gone overnight.
Overnight. And as the new policies started to actually be implemented, the resignations just kept coming. It compounded.
So what was the final tally?
In the end, it was over 200 attorneys who chose to leave. That's upwards of 70% of the division's total staff.
70%.
And the key, as you said at the top, is that this was voluntary. This was a self-purge. They chose to leave rather than work under this new mission.
Which brings us to the memo itself. What on earth was in that document that would make highly trained career lawyers just abandon their jobs en masse?
At its core, it was a mandate for neutrality.
What does that mean in practice?
It explicitly stated that the Civil Rights Division would now protect the rights of all Americans. Period. No preference, no prejudice. It was a direct rejection of the idea that its resources should be focused on some groups over others.
That sounds, on the surface, that sounds like the basic principle of equal protection under the law. Why would that be so controversial for civil rights attorneys?
Because for many of them, their entire philosophy was built on a different idea. They were recruited based on their alignment with the previous administration's focus on, righting what they saw as systemic wrong.
Which requires selective intervention.
Exactly. It requires you to pick a side, to
Yeah.
use federal power to rebalance the scales. So a sudden shift to a neutral, quote-unquote, colorblind enforcement. That wasn't just a policy change. It felt like an attack on their life's work.
So the goal of the memo was to end that two-tier system.
That was the stated goal, yes, to stop using identity categories as a tool to push a political agenda.
So this was a complete ideological reset. Let's dig into the actual policy shifts. What changed?
The pivot was incredibly stark. The new agenda laid out 3 core areas, and all of them signaled a major realignment toward what the administration was calling anti-woke priorities.
Okay, let's take them one by one. First up was a commitment to dismantling DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Sure.
How does the Civil Rights Division even do that nationally?
This is where the legal strategy gets very sophisticated. It's not about their own internal HR policies. It's about using their enforcement power. Specifically, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Remind us what Title VI does.
Title VI prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in any program that gets federal funding.
Yeah.
So the new strategic interpretation is that many modern DEI programs, especially ones that look like they have quotas or race-based preferences in hiring or admissions, actually violate Title VI.
Because they require treating people differently based on race.
Precisely. So the same division that was accused of pushing identity politics is now using that same bedrock civil rights law to dismantle programs that classify people by identity.
That is a wild pivot. So they would go after universities, hospitals.
Anyone getting federal money, they'd investigate them for reverse discrimination. It's a way to weaponize regulatory enforcement. The threat of losing your federal funding is a very powerful tool to force change.
Wow. Okay, what was the second major shift in the memo?
The second was a complete 180 on transgender rights policies.
The ones inherited from the last administration.
Right. As we mentioned, the division had been interpreting Title IX, which is about sex-based discrimination in education, to include gender identity for things like sports.
And the new mandate changes that enforcement.
Completely. The new division signaled it was pulling back from forcing that interpretation. Instead, it would focus on enforcement guided by more traditional biological definitions of sex in areas like sports. It's not that they'd ignore trans rights cases, but they explicitly rejected the previous administration's broad legal interpretations and where they were putting their resources.
Okay. And the third one seems like a clear signal to a different group of people, the commitment to ending anti-Christian bias.
Yes, and this was a huge priority shift. The main legal tools here are the First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause and a law called RLUIPA,
RLUIP.
the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
Well,
The administration's view was that religious liberty, especially for Christians, had been seriously neglected.
so how do they use the Civil Rights Division to weed out bias?
They focused their lawyers and their money on 2 things. First, using RLUIPA to fight zoning laws that discriminate against religious institutions. So, for example, if a town denies a church a building permit for what seems like biased reasons, the DOJ would step in. And second, they'd go after cases where religious individuals or groups face discrimination in jobs or education. They're reframing religious freedom as a top-tier civil right, putting it on the same level, or even higher, than the progressive priorities of the past.
So you take those 3 things together, dismantling DEI, reversing trans policies, and prioritizing anti-Christian bias cases.
Yeah.
And the reaction from the staff was that this was like kryptonite.
Or sunlight to a vampire was another phrase used.
Why such an extreme reaction?
You have to understand, for many of these attorneys, these weren't just policies. This was their core belief system. It's why they went into government work. So when a new mandate comes in that demands neutrality and actively works to reverse everything they built, it makes their entire professional identity obsolete.
Neutrality felt like an attack.
Because it took away their political mission, yes.
And Dillon's response to 200 people quitting was, what? Did she try to stop them?
The exact opposite. Sources say the leadership just held the door open for them. They openly welcomed the resignations.
They saw it as a good thing.
They saw it as a success, a necessary self-purge. The administration's narrative was that this proved the department was filled with people who were unwilling to enforce the law impartially.
Right. The story they told was, see, we asked them to treat everyone equally, and they quit.
And that framing is critical because it turns a huge staffing crisis into a victory for their whole philosophy. It supports the idea that the bureaucracy is fundamentally biased and has to be torn down.
Which brings us to the main point of this deep dive. This whole story of the Civil Rights Division.
Right.
It's not a one-off event.
Not at all. It's a template, a microcosm of a much, much broader strategy to completely remake the entire federal government.
Right. This is where we transition to the overall goal, the dismantling of the administrative state.
The events at DOJ are just one piece of a huge blueprint. The strategy being used is described as a very aggressive and frankly sophisticated coordinated pincer movement.
A pincer movement, so attacking from two sides at once.
Exactly. Component 1 attacks the structure and the budget. Component 2 attacks the personnel and the mission.
Let's start with the first part, the structural attack. This is being led by a whole new agency, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
DOGE's only job is structural and fiscal demolition. It's designed to cut, reorganize, and just eliminate government functions. So while you have someone like Dillon changing the mission inside an agency,
DOGE is attacking the budget from the outside.
from the top down, exactly.
And their ultimate goal here is just staggering. They're talking about cutting 75% of the federal workforce.
75% over the next 3 years, it's a number that's hard to even comprehend. We haven't seen anything on that scale since, post-war demobilizations.
And they see the DOJ situation as proof it can be done.
It's their proof of concept. They saw a 70% voluntary reduction in one division, and now they believe a 75% cut is possible across the board if you combine that ideological pressure with these structural attacks.
I mean, what kind of numbers are we talking about so far? How many jobs have actually been cut?
Well, the federal workforce is in the millions, but sources indicate that around 320,000 federal jobs have already been shed. That's already one of the biggest reductions in DC history. And DOGE is going after the big ones like the Department of Education for huge cuts or even outright elimination.
But wait a minute. Congress controls the money, the power of the purse. How can the White House just eliminate an agency if Congress won't defund it?
That's the critical question. And this is where the strategy gets very legally creative. They're using these expansive interpretations of something called budgetary impoundment theories.
Okay, let's break that down. What is impoundment?
Simply put, it's when the president refuses to spend money that Congress has already approved.
So Congress allocates the money, but the executive branch controls the spending of it.
Exactly. And it's always been a huge constitutional fight.
Right. I remember there was a big law passed in the 70s to stop presidents from doing this.
You're right, that's vital context. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974, it was designed specifically to stop the president from unilaterally refusing to spend money. It created these two formal processes, rescissions and deferrals.
What's the difference?
A rescission is when the president formally asks Congress to cancel the funding. But it only happens if both the House and Senate agree within 45 days.
And a deferral.
A deferral is a temporary delay in spending, but the president has to tell Congress, and Congress can vote to force the money to be released.
So there are checks and balances, but this new strategy is getting around those. They're calling it silent impoundment. How does that work?
Silent impoundment is when the executive branch just quietly tells agencies to slow walk or withhold spending without sending any of those formal notifications to Congress.
And you don't spend the money and don't tell anyone.
Pretty much. They rely on some specific legal memos that give the executive branch broad discretion over how funds are managed internally. So if Congress isn't formally notified, it's much harder for them to legally challenge it.
I see. So you can't use the Impoundment Control Act if you're not told an impoundment is happening.
That's the loophole. It allows the administration to slowly starve an agency of its operational funds. The money is there on paper, but it never gets spent. It makes it, as the sources say, virtually impossible for these departments to function.
Okay, so that's component one, the fiscal sledgehammer, star of the system. Now for component two, attacking the people in the mission. And this is where something called Schedule F comes in.
Schedule F is the legal scalpel. And it was reportedly reinstated on day one of the new administration, which shows you how important it is to their strategy. It goes after the very idea of a protected career civil servant.
The civil service was created to prevent political purges.
Yeah.
To have a professional, nonpartisan government workforce. How does Schedule F get around that?
Well, those protections are in the law, Title V of the U.S. Code. They make it very hard to fire a career federal employee without cause. Schedule F gets around that by just redefining the job itself. It reclassifies tens of thousands of jobs, maybe 50,000 or more, into a new category. It says these jobs aren't just administrative, they're policy-making or policy advocating roles.
And what's the legal effect of that reclassification?
The second a job becomes Schedule F, the person in it is stripped of all those civil service protections. They legally become something more like a political appointee.
Meaning they can be fired at will.
At will, it legally allows for mass political firings without all the usual process and paperwork.
So going back to the Civil Rights Division, if that 70% hadn't quit voluntarily, Schedule F would have been the tool to remove them anyway.
That is the perfect synergy of the strategy. It's the backstop. You install a leader like Dillon to change the mission. If the career staff resists, Schedule F gives you the power to just purge them and replace them.
Okay, let's put the two pincers together now. We have the budget cuts from DOGE and impoundment, and then the legal threat of Schedule F. How does this hollowing out actually work in practice?
It's designed to be ruthlessly efficient. DOG's budget cuts and the withholding of funds create this constant state of chaos and scarcity.
So everyone's job is harder.
Much harder. And at the same time, the new leadership, backed by Schedule F, is changing the mission to something the staff finds, professionally hostile.
So you're deliberately creating a toxic work environment for anyone who doesn't agree with the new agenda.
That's a good way to put it. It's a compelled resignation system.
Right.
You don't always have to fire people, which can be messy. You just make the job impossible. Your purpose is reversed, your budget is gone, and your job security is stripped away. For a lot of people, quitting is the only option left.
It's a way to clean house without actually having to do all the firing.
It's arguably one of the most effective strategies for institutional change we've seen in government in a very long time. The administration is, as one source put it, hollowing out the federal bureaucracy from both the top down and the bottom up.
So we have to ask the big question here. If the goal is to get rid of 75% of the federal workforce, what does that actually mean for the country, for the ability of the government to just function?
And that's where this stops being about political strategy and starts being about day-to-day governance. The federal government does thousands of things that aren't political at all.
Like what?
I mean, aviation safety, nuclear plant regulations, processing Social Security applications, ensuring our food is safe. The list goes on and on.
So if an agency like, say, the EPA or OSHA loses 70 or 75% of its staff, does that basically mean it shuts down, even if the laws it's supposed to enforce are still on the books?
Its capacity for enforcement is just decimated. You lose all that institutional memory, the people who actually know how these complex systems work. And you can't just replace that overnight with political appointees who might not have that deep technical expertise.
So for the average person, the result isn't that the law has changed. It's that there's no one left to enforce it.
That's it, exactly. A law against polluting a river doesn't mean much if there's no one at the EPA to investigate the complaint and prosecute the case. The law effectively becomes optional.
So this is where the political goal becomes a real crisis in just. The government's ability to do its job. Your ability to get help, whether it's for a civil rights issue or a workplace safety problem, is just gone.
It's severely diminished. The political victory of dismantling the administrative state could, ironically, create a crisis for the rule of law itself, because the law isn't just what's written down, it's about the capacity to enforce it. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to our listeners for engaging with this detailed analysis of the structural changes underway in Washington.
That's all for this deep dive. But it leaves us with one haunting question. If the guardians of the rules are the first to break them, who is left to protect the game?